what is one thing we don't often think about when it comes to the attributes of God? And I have another preface. I love prefacing questions to you with stories you'll never tell about yourself. You're too humble for that. But one of my favorite moments in our friendship is you were talking about the jealousy of God. Elkanah, his name. Yeah. I, the Lord, am jealous. Yeah. I'm a jealous God. And you came to our church. You're like, what should I preach? I'm like, man, preach on the jealousy of God. So good. That was just part of a conversation where you were expressing your deep love for the attributes of God. I know you studied this. You're writing a book right now called Consider the Lilies. Are you allowed to say that?
Yeah, tentatively.
Tentatively. And it is about the attributes of God being an anchor, a source of strength and hope for those who struggle with anxiety, depression, even those who are suicidal and wrestling with things. Your main driver, I think, for a lot of your teaching and things have just been focused on the attributes of God.
Yeah.
What do people miss in your experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love most about the attributes of God is that they're not merely characteristics, but so many of those attributes are also promises that God extends to his people. So in that regard, if you're thinking about God's omnipresence, it's not just the fact that God is everywhere. It's the promise that God gives that he'll never leave you or forsake you. So God's omnipresence is not just, God's everywhere. It's a promise he gives that should thrill and comfort our hearts. Similarly, God's sovereignty would be an attribute, but it's also a promise that God gives you, if you're a child of God, that there is nothing in your life that is outside the counsel of God's will. So that's a promise that God gives that should comfort our hearts, because I think one of the things I have wrestled through is how are God's attributes comforting to his children? And it's the reality that so many of them are rooted in the promises that he extends. So if Ecclesiastes 9, it says all of creation and all this world is in the hand of God. And your life and my life is in the hand of God. So whether there's storms or still, we can go, God has promised me there is not one thing in my life that is outside of his plan. I was reading Jonathan Edwards in this regard. He said, every single leaf that falls to the ground is working together for my good. And that's a promise that God gives. So I'm thankful for that. So think about God's omnipresence, his sovereignty, and then even his love. God's love is an attribute, but it's also a promise. There's neither height nor depth nor angel nor principality that can separate us from this love of God. And so I'm thankful for that. And I've been trying to look at the attributes of God within that framework. And obviously one of the attributes of God is that he is true. So, which means that when God makes a promise, he has never, ever failed to keep those promises. So it's not like he's batting 990%, or he's not shooting 90% from the field goal percentage. He is always true. And so we can know that from a sovereignty perspective, from an omniscience perspective, that he knows us. So those are things that bring comfort to me, far beyond just the affirmation of the theological doctrine. And I'm so thankful for that in Scripture.